Спасибо вам большое. What an enormous audience here. And so many women. That's very nice to see too. So welcome everybody. Thank you for your time. And well, I would like to say, я очень рада быть сегодня у вас в Томске. Но я не буду говорить по-русски, потому что вы все прекрасно знаете русский язык, но надо практиковать английский язык. И для меня намного легче по-английски. So I will speak in English today. I'm very happy to see so many of you here. I would like to talk to you today about three things. First of all, a little bit about myself and my role as ambassador. Secondly, about the political situation and the importance of dialogue. And lastly, about the strong connections between Russia and the Netherlands, and in particular also the Netherlands and Tomsk. So, when I started preparing for this lecture, I thought let's start with a little bit of football, because most people know about football. But since yesterday it's a very painful subject for the Netherlands, because we did not qualify for the World Championships in Russia in 2018. And as you can imagine, the Netherlands is a country where football, we have a long tradition, we have great players like Johan Cruyff, but we unfortunately will not be in Russia for the World Championships 2018. But still, I would like to say a few words about Johan Cruyff. He called himself the most important export product from the Netherlands. Now, he was not a very modest man, but he was a football player, so I suppose that figures. And I hear also that you have a connection with football here, because the Zabivavka, the wolf, which is the mascot for the World Cup, was designed by one of your fellow students here, Yekaterina Bakharova from Tomsk. And so, you know, Zabivavka is like an ambassador presenting Russia around the world, so I guess that would make me a colleague of his or her, Zabivavka. But football aside, I wonder if I ask you, what do you know about the Netherlands? Would you have some associations? Could you call a few things? What would you say if I said Netherlands or Holland? Would you say anything at all? Not?
What is the Netherlands associated with? Any association that comes to your mind? Mills, channels,
tulips,
whatever.
Nичего? Then I have a lot of work to do, because I need to tell.
She knows.
Yes, yes.
There is a question.
It's not a question whether she would like herself, but it's always a Egypt. I'm out of the University of Amsterdam, and when you find the association with the Netherlands, what is the book? The book of whom help, and to write this was my first private source, which I found in the research library of the University.
Anne Frank, yeah, her story.
Now,
Peace, Profits and Principles by Professor Voorhoeven. Yeah. I think that says a lot about the Netherlands, Peace, Profits and Principles, so thank you for that. Anyway, so there are some associations, and some of you do know the Netherlands. Any more?
Please don't be shy.
I know it's always horrible when somebody asks you to say something. So let me carry on, and maybe at the end of the lecture you can tell me your associations. But I think Peace, Profits and Principles are definitely part of Dutch culture. Tulips, orange bikes. And I thought maybe some of you would mention Peter the Great, Piotr Veliki, because he was in the Netherlands. And he, I think, connected a lot of cultural and historic links between our two countries. And actually linking two countries together, linking subjects together, bringing people together, that is exactly what my work as an ambassador entails, and what diplomats do. Making connections between countries, strengthening ties, create ties when they are not there, explaining what is happening in Russia to the Netherlands and what's happening in the Netherlands to Russia. So building bridges. And I must admit, it's a job that I do with great pleasure. Maybe a few words about myself. I started last year as ambassador to the Russian Federation. I had been in Moscow before, but that is a very long time ago. Most of you weren't even born yet. And that was still in the time of the Soviet Union. And I have to say, I was struck by the incredible changes, such as the fact that I can travel freely to Tomsk and meet with a lot of you. How many people speak English? It's an enormous difference. But also, if you look in Moscow, if you look at the development of the cities, if you look at the fact that I can now pay with my PIN pass everywhere in Russia, in every hotel, in every shop, and they ask "Ваш пин-код, пожалуйста?" It's exactly the same word in Dutch as it is in Russian. Enormous changes, the hipstery all over the place. I think you see, certainly in the younger generations, our cultures and our countries growing closer and closer together. So I try to visit as many parts of this enormous Russian territory as I can. I was in Nizhny Novgorod a couple of weeks ago. I was in Kazan a couple of months ago, St. Petersburg. I did a road trip through Russia during our holidays in the northwest. Veliki Novgorod, Pskov, Karelia, the north. So we try to see as much as of this beautiful country as we can. And everywhere there are connections one way or the other with the Netherlands, be it through history, universities, culture, scientific cooperation or business cooperation. Because Dutch businessmen you will find all over the world as well, and in fact there are some here today as well. Maybe one more personal remark that I'd like to add. Maybe not all of you expect an ambassador to be a woman. I noticed that in the Russian Federation, going to the MIT, to your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there are still very few women ambassadors. That was the same when I started. I don't think there was a single one. But we made a concerted effort over the last 20-25 years to really recruit women for the Foreign Service. And we have 30%, 30, of all our ambassadors are women now. So to those of you who have aspirations to go into international affairs or diplomacy or foreign relations, keep going, because what didn't seem possible 25 years ago seems very possible a little bit later, and you have to start somewhere. And I have to say, in the MIT, there's a lot of young colleagues and young women working there right now. So, with having said that, I've been here now almost a year, traveling as much as I can, enjoying the country very much and really trying to strengthen connections in the field of business, in the field of culture, in the field of agriculture, between the Russian Federation and the Netherlands. Let me say a few things now about the good moments, but also about some of the tougher times. I think we've had big moments not so long ago, 2013, when our King and Queen were here for the Sochi Olympic Games, but also in the framework of the bilateral year we had. Because in 2013 we celebrated the fact that Russia and the Netherlands have 400 years relations. And that is a very long time, so we go way back in history. So when did it all start? Well, of course it started with trade. If you think about the Netherlands, you think about trade. We are a commercial nation, we are located at the sea, and we've always been maritime, traveling around the world, from Japan to China, and from Thailand to Indonesia, and from South America, Brazil, to South Africa, but also Russia. And Russia became quite early, in the 13th, 14th centuries, in the places that I just mentioned, Pskov and Novgorod. We had Dutch businessmen who traded with Russian businessmen, and that developed into a bigger and bigger relationship. As I just said, in 2013 we celebrated the 400-year relationship, and Peter the Great, as you know, spent quite a bit of time in the Netherlands. Exactly 320 years ago that he went on his big embassy, it's called his big tour, and he learned many skills there in the Netherlands. He was there incognito. He called himself Piotr Mikhailovich or something like that. Mikhailov, so that people wouldn't know he was a Tsar, but he was more than 2 meters, so everybody recognized him anyway. But he worked in the Netherlands on, for example, shipbuilding. And did you know that as a result from the cooperation in those days, some of the words that you use come from the Dutch language, such as stoel, chair, comes from the Dutch, rugzak, what you have on your back, stuurman, the guy who steers the ship, appelsien, broekie, zond, snoer, all words that come directly from the Dutch. Snoer is snoer, broekie, broek. So these are Russian words that have their origin in the Dutch language. And vice versa, we also learned some words from the Russian. Some people say that the word bistro comes from Russian, bystre, bystre. The Russians that were very impatient, they wanted the food quickly, bystre, bystre, I don't know. But one of our favorite expressions in the Netherlands is pierwaaien. And that means having fun, going out, drinking, eating, and apparently that comes from the Russian piravach. So, linguistic influences from both languages, one to the other. Then, in the 19th century, the younger sister of Tsar Alexander I, also Tsar Alexander Nicholas I, Anna Pavlovna, she married the Dutch King William II. So we always say in the Netherlands we really had a Russian queen as well, and she made a great impact because the Dutch are always a little bit stingy with money, as you know, we don't like to spend too much money. But then we had this Russian queen, and she did like to spend money. I think Russian women still do. If I look around Moscow, how beautifully dressed Russian women always are. And Queen Anna Pavlovna brought golden coaches, carriages, beautiful clothes. She renovated all the palaces. And we have quite a few villages in the Netherlands that are called after her. Only in Dutch we don't call her Pavlovna, but we call her Paulona for some reason. So if you hear somebody say Anna Paulona, that's the Russian queen who became the Dutch queen. And so our present king, King Willem Alexander, has also partly Russian DNA, Russian family members. In Soviet times, it was primarily governments that were connected to each other. There were always diplomatic relations. There were also some economic relations in Soviet times. But I think the big difference, if I look at the last few decades, is the very intense relations between individual people, Russian and Dutch people. They really developed, intensified, and multiplied. And I can tell you that in the old days, it was very rare to see a Russian person in Amsterdam or a Dutch person in Moscow. And now, I think in Amsterdam, you can hear the Russian language at almost every street corner. So the people-to-people context, the visits from people to both countries has really intensified. And a lot of Dutch people have found their way across the Russian lands, businessmen, scientists, tourists, students, and so forth. And well, I think that is something that really has helped a lot and matters a lot, because if you know each other better, if you work on different areas, I think you also understand each other better, and it's easier to find solutions to mutual problems. In the beginning of my speech, I said that I would also mention briefly the current political situation. I think that for a long time after the Cold War was finished, we thought, right, now we grow to a peaceful world where there will not be problems anymore. Some of you may remember the book that was called The End of History, as if all history would be finished, all problems would be finished. And of course the world is not as simple as that, and history is not as simple as that. So in a way we see a little bit, I think, the return of history. We thought that, you know, Europe, Russia, everybody would develop along the same path, and that there would be a point of no return, and we would always happily live together. But nowadays I do think that there are some serious differences of opinion, for example, on Crimea, on Eastern Ukraine, and that's a reality that we have to deal with. And as a result of that, you know, sanctions were introduced, so that also makes the business climate a little bit more complicated. And in the Netherlands, we had the big trauma of the plane that was down, the MH17, the Boeing, where almost 300 people died. They were just shot out of the sky. and almost 200 of them were Dutch people. And as you can imagine, the Netherlands is a small country. Almost everybody knew something on board of that plane. And it was mainly people going to academic conferences or studying or going on holidays or little children. So that had an enormous emotional impact. And I have to say that so far the Russian Federation has actually been helpful in the investigation. As the work we do now is try to find out what happened, and this is all based on the Security Council Resolution 2166, which calls upon all countries to cooperate. I think I can't deny there have been some negative developments and some tensions. But on the other hand, we in the Netherlands also strongly believe we share the same continent. We have a 400-year history. We have always had ups and downs in our history. And we also know that there have been very good times, such as the enormous help that Russia was during the Second World War in defeating the fascism, in the time of Napoleon, when you stopped Napoleon, and in many other ways where we work together. And we also remember The Hague, and maybe you who read Peace, Profits and Principles remembered Tsar Nicholas II, who chose to hold the first ever peace conference in 1899, and that was in the Netherlands, in The Hague, and we have a beautiful building as a result of it, the Peace Palace in The Hague, and that also started the tradition, or strengthened, I should say. We always had a tradition of international law in the Netherlands, but it strengthened that. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration was set up as a result of that, and many more international courts and tribunals. So for those of you who study international law, I think The Hague in the Netherlands is certainly a place that you will come across. And this was, Tsar Nicholas II was very important as the founder of that peace conference. So I think coming back to the present time, it is very clear that Europe and Russia and the Netherlands as part of Europe have to work together in addressing the huge challenges of today. And you know them all. It's the Syrian crisis, it's also the fight against terrorism, it's the Middle East peace process, but also a huge issue like climate change. We just had an interesting presentation from the rector of your university about the focus areas that Tomsk State University works on, and I saw that climate change and everything to do with the research around that is very much on top of your agenda as well. So we need to find a modus vivendi, and I think we cannot live in isolation from each other, and we have to find constructive solutions. And we, for example, believe very much in the importance of the Minsk process, that is led by France and Germany and Russia on the other side. Belarus is very helpful in providing the place to find a solution to the Ukrainian crisis, and then we could get back on our joint positive track. So now from politics to trade, I think whereas you see that politically there are some tensions on the line, actually, economically, the Netherlands and Russia have a very close and deep relationship. The Netherlands is the third investor in Russia, so if you total it all up, it's a big investment position. The Netherlands is still the third trading partner, and the last few years, as a result of the economic crisis, the lower oil prices, the political tensions, you saw that our exports and imports decreased a little bit. Over the last year, it has actually increased by 30%. Now, we like to think at the embassy it's because we all work so hard to increase our exports, but I think it has more to do with the general climate here in Russia, the economic climate that is going well, is stable and growing. The Netherlands is a small country, of course. We are about the size of the Moscow Oblast, so not very big in size. And Tomsk, I think, is the size of Poland. But if you look at the Netherlands from an economic perspective, I think it was President Bill Clinton who once said, small country, big footprint. We are about the number 18 economy in the world. We are the second exporter of agricultural products in the world. We are in the top 4 of innovative economies. If you look at the Davos, the World Economic Forum, or the World Bank rankings. So in terms of our entrepreneurship, innovation, import-export, we are actually in quite a strong position. We try to make good use of every square kilometer of land we have. So we have a very kind of innovative and modern way of working with agriculture. And in fact, I will say a few more words about it later on. If you look at the Netherlands, it's almost like one big city. And we try to be an omnigore, a smart city. But the rest of it is agriculture land, and we try to also be an omniferm, have a smart farm, to be smart in agriculture. And how to do that if you are small, you have to constantly reinvent yourself, innovate, adapt, and change to the new situation in the world. So, second investor in Russia, second or third investor. We have many big companies from the Netherlands in Russia. Shell, Unilever, you may know some of the names, Philips, Lely, of course, I have to mention, sitting here at the table, and Adecco Logera, I have to mention, anybody else here, big Dutch companies, but there are also a lot of Russian companies. I'm sure you all know and use Yandex, that use the Netherlands for their investments, both internationally and back in the Russian economy. So trade has grown again, export and import are growing again. We do see a change compared to before, whereas maybe in the 90s and 2000 the Netherlands would export a lot of cheese and food products and tomatoes. We now see that Russia is much more interested in technology, equipment, infrastructure, because you can make the cheese here. Well, not still quite as good as in the Netherlands, I have to say, but you can do it. But you can also grow vegetables here, increase your milk production. So we move much more from exporting products to exporting equipment, technology, knowledge and know-how. A few more words about the Russian economy. I think one of the pleasures of being in Moscow is that you have all kind of interesting events like the Gaida Forum, where the brightest minds are talking about economy, such as former Minister Kudrin, but also IMF, World Bank were there. And all economists, I have to say, were very complimentary about the way that the Russian Federation had tackled the macroeconomic crisis. For the economists amongst you, the IMF said it was a textbook approach, so there is stability. But the next challenge is growth. It's one thing to be stable, but it's another thing to start growing. And maybe this crisis is a good opportunity to think of new ideas, structural reforms, and there are many people who claim to have invented the word never waste a good crisis. But if you have a crisis, maybe it's Winston Churchill, he was a good one for words like that, but a crisis is often a good time to think, okay, how can we do things better? We did that in the Netherlands. We also suffered very badly from the financial crisis in 2008, 9, 10, and it really stimulated us to think, okay, we have a less good financial situation, we have budget problems. How can we be smart? How can we spend our money better? How can we do structural reforms and prepare ourselves better for this difficult economic situation? So, for the Netherlands, Russia is still a very interesting market, 140 million consumers, competitively priced, doing rather well in some other markets, and of course, and I have to say that here in Tomsk, I think what Dutch companies really like in Russia is the smart students. Very, very clever people, well-educated people, and increasingly also English-speaking. And I have to say that is really an important event as well, because all the companies are working globally nowadays, and without speaking a language that is used globally, it is a problem. But really well-trained and well-educated people. A few words about cultural ties. We also, apart from political relation and strong economic relation, we have very strong cultural ties with the Russian Federation. That also started a long time ago with the famous Peter the Great. But if you look at the Russian museums, the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, of course, is an example. There's a fantastic treasure of Dutch paintings. I think once upon a time there were more Rembrandts in Russia than there were in the Netherlands. And as we speak, an exhibition was just opened in the Netherlands of Dutch masters, Dutch paintings from Russian museums, mainly the Hermitage in the Netherlands, under the title "The Old Masters Are Coming Home." So that's a very nice connection as well. Amsterdam, one of the few places in the world that actually has a structural relationship with the Hermitage, and those of you who've been to the Netherlands, you probably have visited the Hermitage aan de Amstel, which is a small-scale dépendance branch, so to say, of the Hermitage, which every time bits of the beautiful collections of the Hermitage Museum. But we also share many other interests. We had a big museum conference also in St. Petersburg with almost 100 people from Dutch museums and Russian museums, thinking about how can we make our museums more modern, more accessible, also for people, for example, with disabilities, people with hearing disabilities or visual disabilities, or in wheelchairs. How can we, there was a very interesting parallel conference on outsider art. You know, people with autism or psychological problems who can make very beautiful works of art. How can you contribute as a museum to a more inclusive society? Modern dance. Of course, Russia is the best at classical dance. I don't think anybody can compete with that. But we have the Nederlands Danstheater, a very interesting Dutch modern dance company, and they come to Russia to perform and to work together with Russian dancers. Architectural heritage, design. In fact, in the delegation that came today and tomorrow to Tomsk, there are also some architects, because there's so much interesting architectural heritage in all the different Russian cities. So across a broad terrain of art, culture, museum, dance, even plays. We participated in the Czechoslovakia Festival with the Dutch theatre company, Toneelgroep Amsterdam. It's a very vibrant and positive exchange. And let us not forget the people-to-people contacts. I mentioned them already, but very important, I think, students. And we've seen Jerke Verschoor is here. Jerke, where are you? Here. He represents the Netherlands University Foundation for International Cooperation, if I say it correctly. And we see that the amount of Russian students to the Netherlands has tripled over the last few years. And this year alone, there are 1,200 Russian students in the Netherlands. And if you add it all up, I think it's a substantial amount. And we also see more and more Dutch students coming to Russia for studies, for exchange programs. So I think that's a very good sign. And by the way, if you're interested later on, do get in touch with Jerke Verschoor here, the guy with the orange tie, because he can tell you all about studying in the Netherlands. And I think we even have some scholarships, don't we, Jerke? So that might be interesting too. Well, after saying a few words about myself and about the broader ties between Russia and the Netherlands and the different areas where we work, politics, economics, culture, agriculture, I should specifically manage as well, innovation. A few words about Tomsk, because, well, why are we here? You know, what is the reason for us to come to Tomsk? Because there are so many places in Russia. This is such a huge country. You can't obviously visit the whole country and go everywhere. But Tomsk, for us, in our program at the embassy, is one of the important regions that we very much want to cooperate with. And there are some very old cultural ties, I have to say, very limited. But in the 20s, there were some enthusiastic young Dutch communists who came to work in Russia because they believed they were building a new country here, and one of them was called Rutgers, Sebald Rutgers, and he started a colony, the Kuzbas, in Kemerovo, but there was nothing going on there, so his wife lived here in Tomsk, because this was a more civilized place at the time. And apparently the house where he lived, a nice old wooden house, is somewhere here, and I hope to have a look at that tomorrow. But I think for us in Tomsk, the most important aspect is the academic cooperation. This is the place with 6 top universities. I learned all about the academic mile earlier on when we had a presentation at offers very good quality university. So we see, for example, cooperation between Tomsk State University and the Siberian State Medical University, with Maastricht in the Netherlands, Wageningen, and new universities coming up as well, Twente, Leiden. So some of you may even have been in the Netherlands and studied at this university, but the academic cooperation is really very important. And another element that is very important is the concept of smart city. Omnigorod. More and more people nowadays live in cities, right? And you see that development not just in Russia, but you see it everywhere. You see it in the Netherlands, where everybody wants to live in Amsterdam or Rotterdam, in the big city. Villages are actually emptying out a bit. You see it in the US, where the Midwest is emptying out and everybody goes either to the East Coast or to the West Coast. You see it in Brazil, where cities like Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro are becoming enormous. You see it in Africa, where Laos almost can't cope with all the people that are coming. So this process of urbanization, many people together in a small space in a city, is what you see all over the world. And we have to think of how to deal with that. How can you make the city livable? From the point of view of housing, from the point of view of transport, from the point of view of moving around a place, from making it a healthy place to live, from making it an efficient place to live, not wasting resources by having the lights on all the time, for example, or being dangerous, like never having lights on at all. So there are many challenges that we all need to think about together, and Tomsk and the Netherlands, I think, have set up a very nice cooperation on working on this smart city concept. What does it mean, and how can we work on that together? And I met Governor Zwatchkin at the World Economic Forum in St. Petersburg not so long ago, and he worded it as follows. He said, an omnigorod, a smart city, is a comfortable living environment and access to new technological solutions at a minimal cost for the population, and that is a demand that we share. And for us, what is really important there is that we work with business, with universities, with the government, the city government, also the oblast government, and the citizens. Because in the end, it's the inhabitants, it's the citizens who know what they want and what they like and what they don't like. So how can you involve the citizens more in decisions about the city? And this morning we saw a first interesting activity taking place here in Tomsk. It was a living lab, Živaya Laboratoria, where students, professors, city workers, Dutch people, everybody from academia, from business, populations were working together and thinking about what actually do we need here in the city. What do we need to make it more livable? What do we need to make it safer? What do we need to make it more fun, to make it more interesting, to make it more accessible? So I really see a lot of good possibilities there. And we will bring our experiences, and of course every country has its own reality and every country has to do it in its own way. But in the area of smart city, I think we have a lot to learn from each other. And then of course we are Dutch, we always like to trade and we always like to do more business. So we brought also some companies that will explore possibilities here to do more business and to see what the possibilities are here in Tomsk. Let me say that I can talk for hours and hours on the Netherlands, on Russia, on our bilateral relation, on the political, economic relations, on foreign policy issues if you want. But in my experience, it's also always nice if you have some dialogue and some exchange. So I'd be very much looking forward to hearing your questions or your observations or your remarks and have some real discussion and dialogue with you. And maybe to finish off, I really think it's important to have these kind of visits and to visit each other's country. I was talking to somebody from a think tank in Russia the other day, and he said if I watch television in Europe and I see an item about Russia, I don't recognize my country. But if I watch television in Russia and I see an item about Europe, I don't recognize Europe. So what image do we get about each other through the mass media, through television, through maybe also the new social media? And that is why I think it is so important to have real context, to see for yourself, to make up your own mind, to talk to each other, to have critical dialogue and critical questions, and to see that what you see in the media is not always quite how it is in reality. As I said, relations between the Netherlands and Russia are long-standing. It is very complex, it is very multidimensional, it is very intensive, whatever the times are. And there's a nice Russian saying that goes, Stari drug, luche novich dvug. So we are stari drug, or padruga maybe, girlfriend. We are here to stay. We've been here for 400 years. I hope we'll stay for another 400 years. Who knows what the world will look like then? Maybe it will be full of Umni Garada. We, as an embassy, very much believe in working together, in the importance of dialogue, in talking to each other, but also through partnerships between entrepreneurs, science, governments, artists, and students like you. And let me come back once more to football, even if I'm not such a fan of football, certainly not at the moment, but Johan Cruyff, this Dutch football player, was a very wise man. He was a bit of a philosopher, and one of his famous sayings is, winning is something you do together. You can never win alone. You always have to do it in partnership. So, to me, Netherlands and Tomsk is something we can do together, and let's hope we all win and gain a lot out of that. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions on whatever subject, and I will try to do my best to answer them as well as I can. Thank you very much for coming all here.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Please, questions now. If you're shy, you can ask them in Russian. Just like that.
The first one is always the hardest one. So once one person is brave enough to...
Well, actually, I have one.
Huh?
It could be strange a little bit. So we had the saying, the expression Dutch disease.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it means dependency from the natural resources.
Yeah.
And some disorder in economy because of that dependency. But I could not find a period in the Dutch history where that occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have that?
Yeah, 60, 70. Yeah. The term Dutch disease refers to a period when we first found our natural gas. And of course, we never had quite as much as Russia. You have vast amounts of resources of oil and gas, but we found quite a bit of gas as well. And everybody thought, great, we have gas, we export it, there's nothing we need to do anymore, right? We can just spend the money on nice things. But that didn't end very well for us because A, the gas at some point runs out, of course. B, because we are a very densely populated area, the place where we extracted the gas, there were a lot of earthquakes and damage to where the people lived in Groningen. So the local people were not very happy with that. And we basically actually got too lazy. And we didn't do the necessary reforms. We thought, let's let the gas money come and, we can sit on our butts, so to say. And then when this money stopped coming, when it all got a bit more complicated, I think we realized that you can never rely on one resource. You have to keep on thinking. You have to think of new things to produce, new things to make, new niches in the economy. In other words, you constantly have to innovate and adapt and change yourself. And that's actually what the Dutch economy did. We very much reduced our reliance on natural gas because of the earthquakes. That's one of the reasons. And we have found other ways to make money. So I think Dutch disease referred to being lazy because you have an easy source of income. And in some ways it's nice, but in some ways I think it also stops thinking and developing.
But when did it happen? I mean, the period
In
that
the
time.
70s, yeah?
1970s?
Yeah. It was in the 1970s, I think. In the 1970s, so it's quite a long time ago. And I can assure you we have cured ourselves from the Dutch disease. But once a word exists like that, it always tends to come back. So if you hear anybody use Dutch disease, say, oh, they're much better now. They don't suffer from it anymore.
Please, other questions? Any questions to Helen Moran?
What was the business do you see in Tomsk?
Could you please introduce yourself? Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay.
What was the business do you see in Tomsk or oysters?
What business, yeah?
Uh-huh.
What business, right, was your question?
Yes.
We see possibilities in several areas. One of them is agriculture. As I said, we have quite a lot to offer in the field of agriculture. We have a company with us here on the right, Mr. Lely. It's a Dutch family company. I've heard him tell the story, so I can repeat it now. And they make robots for milking. And that's very interesting because here in Russia you also see a phenomenon that young people don't want to work on the farm anymore. They don't want to do the work that they used to do in the old days. They think it's a bit old-fashioned. But if you work with robots, that makes it a lot more interesting. So that's one reason. Second, Russia has a diminishing population, a graying population. People are more older people than young people. So who are going to work on those farms? And thirdly, through robots, you get more milk out of a cow, so it's also very good for your increasing your production. So agriculture, you know, those kind of smart robot, modern type of solutions for agriculture is one area. The second is connected to the smart city, for example, lighting systems. In many Dutch cities now you have a system where if people walk in a street, the lights go on. If nobody is walking in the street, the light goes off, so you save energy. Different ways of using sources of light, so that is something that we're working on. In the field of medicine, there's a lot going on in medical developments as well. E-health, how can you use web-based solutions, online solutions for medical problems. And of course the research and development side. I'm looking for Pauline to see if she wants to add any. Architecture.
Yeah. One of the topics that we didn't mention is architecture, to exchange experiences when it comes to urban design, and this is conceptual design of urban development, but also design as a design of buildings and such. What I also wanted to add to what Mrs. Ambassador just said is that when we can excellently meet each other is, for instance, referring to one of the topics that a colleague of Philip's Lighting in our delegation constantly talks about, is that we can help each other when it comes to localizing Netherlands technical solutions in the Russian format, in the Russian environment. And to be more concretely, well, there are some, if you look at lighting systems, some lighting systems that are very well developed, but need to be tailored to the Russian situation, need to be supported by Russian software, which we ultimately fancy that really to be implemented in the local situation. So that's a very good suggestion.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Renée Jones-Bos, and first of all, I wanted to say that we are very pleased to have you here at Scotland Council.
Thank you.
And my question would be, since I'm on my fourth year of studying international relations, my question is, did you encounter many obstacles in your career which you consider many? How did you cope with that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I have to tell you, when I started at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was the only girl at the time in my class. You know, probably in the MIT you do the same year. You have every year a class of new diplomats. So I was the only girl in my class. That was not very encouraging. And when I finished the exams, the then chief of protocol said, "Well, congratulations, but it will be very difficult for you because, you know, let's face it, diplomacy is not really a job for women." And that made me so angry that I thought, I'm going to show you. He thought I would be gone in a year's time, and I was so determined that I stayed for a long, long time, and decided also to show that it was a job for women. And so then, fast forward, I went to a few embassies, I came back to the Netherlands, I was involved for a few years in recruitment of new diplomats, and I made sure that 50% of the diplomatic classes were women, because you need to have a basis to start from. And that worked. And then I did all kind of other jobs, from Security Council to Human Rights Ambassador. I was Director General. I worked my way up the ranks. And I ended up then as ambassador in Washington, the first woman ambassador in Washington, and permanent secretary, say first deputy minister of foreign affairs in The Hague, also the first woman. And that is when I appointed 30% women ambassadors. So my story is, you know, don't worry. I think every country has started from a low point. Everybody has to develop. Russia, although funnily enough, had the first woman ambassador, Alexandra Kollontai. That was in the 20s. So there's always something you can do, and you shouldn't be discouraged. And if you do something that you really like, then I think you're also good at it. And that old ambassador, the chief of protocol, who told me this is not a job for women, I met him again 10 years later when he was long retired, and he said, yeah, maybe I was wrong. So I'm glad I made him swallow his words. So I think I always loved my job, and I think diplomacy is a job for women, because there are many women around the globe that are in diplomacy. Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Ministers of Defense, ambassadors, deputy ministers, director general in international organizations, in the UN system. And let's face it, women are 50% of the world's population, so it would be very strange not to have the voice of women heard in issues that are of importance to all of us. So keep on going.
Well.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jonas. I study economics. And talking about your interpretation of the role of being an ambassador, what are your main points or goals that you want to work on during your period as an ambassador?
If I want to.
Your main goals and objectives here as an ambassador.
Okay, yeah. As an ambassador, it's not quite the same as in business, where you get your KPIs, right? Your key performance indicators. But it's, on the other hand, a little bit like in the old days, you were sent as an ambassador to a country and they would say, do your best, make the best of it. And communications were not so good. It would take months before a letter would reach home, and now it's a lot more concrete. So my goals as ambassador are first to intensify the political context between Russia and the Netherlands in all kind of fields, particularly also in the field of foreign relations, and to make it very concrete. Rearranged meetings, consultations they are called, between the Director Middle East of the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry and the Director Middle East of the Dutch Foreign Affairs Ministry, between our Security Council team and your Security Council team, so intensifying political conversations and relations. The second is to increase our export, and that's why I jokingly just said the last year exports went up with 30%, but of course that has nothing to do just with the work of the embassy, but it does have something to do with making connections, working on areas where you think the Netherlands and Russia are complementary. So, you know, you are very good at growing grain and doing things like that. There we have nothing to offer. but when it comes to greenhouse technology, when it comes to research and development, there are areas where we do have things to offer in the area of innovation. So increase the economic relation between Russia and the Netherlands, and increase, in our case, exports. And thirdly is to make as much use of the cultural exchange as possible, because in times when sometimes politically things are difficult, in the area of culture you can always talk to each other. Dance is dance, and music is music, and theatre is theatre. And I think it's a very important channel of communication which we should use as much as possible. But economics remains a very important part of that, of our KPIs.
Other questions, please?
My name is Olga, as I already said, so I'm from the University of Amsterdam. I have two questions. So one question belongs to the economic field. You already mentioned the term smart cities. Along with the term smart cities, we also use the term of circular economy. And there are some projects already developed by the Netherlands. So my question is, are there some projects or work which the Netherlands, together with Russia, were developed or maybe they planned? Thank you. And the second question, maybe you already mentioned sayings and proverbs by American, by Russian and by Dutch. So what's your motivation? Sometimes we have big challenges, other people have big challenges in career and professional and academic. And what is your personal motivation, maybe of a Dutch poet or writer, which is always follow? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Maybe a few words on the circular economy, then I'll give our colleague of Ministry of Economic Affairs the floor, who is here as well. I think for a country like the Netherlands, which is very densely populated, we don't have much space to dump rubbish, for example, or to, we just, it's quite full in the Netherlands. So we need to be practical and reuse what we have. I think that's one motivation. And the second is we just have a new government agreement. And in that, a really important goal is the implementation of the Paris Agreement on climate. And that also involves the circular economy, so that you reuse what you have. And so I think because we are so densely populated and a small country, we reuse what we have, and because we want to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. And it's very practical. That means using actually less and less energy, as little energy as possible. So isolating, insulating the houses better. That makes a huge difference. Reusing offal, waste. We have waste installations that burn up what there is, but create also energy for other purposes. Greenhouses that create energy that is reused for other purposes. People who put solar panels on their roof so they can feed into the smart grid, to the electricity grid. People who have little small windmills near their houses, but also big windmill parks. So I think what you see in the Netherlands, there's a whole tendency to make our economy as circular as possible, so that actually we waste nothing, we reuse everything, and we move away from too much dependency on the carbon sources. And it will take some time, these things always take time, but I really see a lot of steps being taken in that direction now. Auke, if you have anything to add, then please do.
So I'm from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and the Innovation and Knowledge Department.
What was her second question?
Your personal inspiration for the literature, since you provided lots of citations, proverbs, what is your personal inspiration? What saying or citation could you...
With our society, these are public-private partnerships on different topics, but mainly dealing with the circular economy. And like Investor already said, for example, greenhouses, which were crop, but also energy.
And on your second question, that's a very difficult one. And I also vary very much because I worked 4 years in the United States as ambassador. And when I am in a place, I find it really interesting to find out all about that place. So then I read a lot about the founding fathers, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, particularly John Adams, who came to the Netherlands. He was the first American ambassador to the Netherlands. So I tend to read a lot on the history and the political economy of the country where I am at the time. So now I'm in Russia. So I'm very inspired again by the Russian classical writers. And in the summer I read Anna Karenina. Again, I read it ages ago, but it was so fresh and so relevant, all the questions on how you organize the country, what do you do with the farmers, how you organize cities, Zemstvos and all of that, apart from the story of Anna Karenina himself. I found it socially very interesting, so very inspiring to read. And I try to read a lot of new Russian literature. And I just read another book which is called Loris, and it's set in the Russian Middle Ages. And it is a little bit, it is a story that it's about the life of a man who goes from being a little boy to a doctor, a healer, to a holy fool, and then a monk, and then, so it's his whole history, but it's also the history of Russia in the Middle Ages, what medicines they used and what herbs they used, and how you look at fate and life. So I can't really say I have one favorite author, but at the moment it's very much Russian literature that inspires me.
Thank you very much.
Please, let's other questions. Please, still have some time. So if you want to just push the button.
Or somebody from the back rows. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, somebody from the back also eligible, please.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a question to you. Well, you have explained a lot about what we are doing here and what our interests are. Museums and so on. And my question to you would be, what should we normally do these 2 days? Any
Tips and tricks.
people that we should meet, in the sense that we cannot go away from those without doing this and that, meeting these people, please.
What's so interesting and exciting about our city?
Or maybe we should ask what.
Yeah. Please do. Please say it.
Or what pub or cafe or restaurant should we go to? No tips?
If you like to go by train, so we have so many trains,
Yeah.
railways,
Yeah.
and you can meet, for example, just to see not only Lena Avenue, like the central part of the city. So it's better to go to the environment of railways itself. It's called Health of Scientists, and just to investigate like maybe also to Washington, and you will be the center of this square lane, then the square. Don't
Well, she suggests you take the tram from Professor's Club or Domachona and go to Buttington Square. It's about 5 to 6 stops, right?
No, just two,
Really?
and then you will see only one stone bridge in Tomsk.
Oh, yeah.
In the Netherlands, or next down there are more than 200 bridges, if you remember. So we have only one stone
really must. Yeah.
Also, it's part of architecture.
Yeah.
Architecture.
I have maybe one last question because you all have to go and have to go courses and do your studies. Who of you, you don't have to say anything, but just put up your hand. Who has been in the Netherlands? Yeah. Maybe you at the end, who has been in the Netherlands, where were you, in what place?
Hello, my name is Catherine, and I'm in the Netherlands, and I lived in Badhoevedorp. It's nearby Amsterdam, and my stepfather is Dutch, and my sister is Dutch, and my mother live now in the Netherlands in Badhoevedorp. So, and I lived in the Netherlands about 4 months. So it was really interesting for me, and I meet a lot of people, and I meet with Dutch people and understand their culture and understand their culture diversity, and I don't have again maybe this when I communicate with Dutch.
Thank you very much. And all of you who haven't been but who would like to be, well, you know this guy with the orange tie, Jacob Schor. After the talk, you always can go up to him and say, hey, how can I get to the Netherlands? And we welcome you very much. And I thank you very much for coming here and for your attention. And if there's any questions afterwards, I'll still be here for a few minutes. You can always come up and ask me. So thanks for having me here.